Hey guys, April 5th, 2019. Starting to warm up a little bit, and a lot of people are maybe going to try doing swarm traps for the first time this year. There's a lot of different ways to do swarm traps, a lot of different configurations, a lot of different techniques, and I'm just going to share what I do with mine. Been swarm trapping about 5 or 6 years now. Usually have about 20 to 30 traps. Sometimes I run about 50% with catches. So I have fine-tuned some things over the years, and I'll show you what works for me, and maybe it'll help somebody. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Here in Indiana, things are just starting to begin to bud. We're hearing of swarms being caught in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia. People down south, Louisiana, Florida, people like JP and 628 Dirt Rooster and Mr. Ed have been catching swarms for 2 months, and they've been driving me absolutely crazy. But that's okay, it helps me get to the winter. So here, I'm going to share with what I like to do with swarm traps, and this is my way of doing it. A lot of people do it different ways, so this is just what I like to do. First thing I like to do is I like to I'll turn this around here, switch the video out a little bit so I can show you a little bit what I like to use. You want to look at my ugly mug. I like to use an 8 frame deep. One of the reasons why I like to use an 8 frame deep is because it's just about the 8 or 9 frame is the the space inside that the bees like. I don't like to use 5 frames because sometimes early in the season the 5 frame nukes are just too small for those big primary swarms. So I actually use this particular box for swarm trapping and for large swarms, and I can keep them in there for a number of weeks until they build up, and I really like that. I don't like the round kind that you can buy that you mount up against the side of a tree. I like being able to take my frames out and put them into another box. Sometimes when you use those round ones, you have to cut those out, and it's just extra work for everybody. So I like using my equipment that I'm going to be using to do that with. Makes sense to me. It streamlines everything, and I like the 8 frame because it's not too bulky. People use deeps, which is totally fine. Some people use 5 frame nukes, and that works for them. But just in case there is a really good primary swarm, I don't want to miss it. So I use an 8 frame, and this is what my box looks like. And I also, you'll see on the front there, I usually label them. This one's 1809. This is trap number 9, 2018. I'll have a Sharpie, and I'll come back and I'll put over 19. And what I do is I keep a Word document with all of where my traps are at, because sometimes you can lose track of them. And so this is a labeling system that I learned from Jason Bruns, a beekeeper and around the Liberty, Brookville area. And so he is really, really good at catching swarms. And so I like to be able to know where my traps are so I can keep track. And then year to year, it's almost like fishing with swarm trapping, is if you get some hits, you keep going back to the same spot. So that's what I like to do, is keep a track of where they are. I actually have swarm traps in 4 different counties, and so trying to keep track of them all, it can be, I can't remember. I don't have the brain matter to remember where everything's at, so I put everything down on paper. So this is my 8 frame box, and this is one of the ways that I take them to mount them to a tree, find an old trash tree, and put a big nail in and hang them. Or up here, if I can, I have several traps up on ladder stands. I don't really worry about putting them 10, 12, 15 feet high. I like to be able to reach them. I haven't seen a difference between 6 feet and 12 feet and 20 feet. If you have it baited correctly, they will come and find it. And so sometimes if you leave them in there for a while, the higher they are, the heavier they get, and that's not real fun when you go get them in the dark and you're trying to carry a big heavy box down. So I put them up about, I can reach up about 8 feet, and I usually hang them and just put them on a nail. What I like to do is, as far as bait goes, you'll notice on this lid there's a lot of propolis. There's been bees in this box before. You can look around the the rim of the swarm trap, and you can see on the frames there are a lot of propolis in there. There's been bees in this box before, and so this is going to be bait all by itself. And one thing that you don't want to miss is try to put some old comb in there. This comb smell is really important if you have it, for the bees to smell. And so if you have some old comb, use that, some old broken comb or something like that, that would really bait that hive. And one of the things too is I put ventilation on both sides, and it does two things. One, it gives them ventilation, and then another one, what it does is it helps the sort of like a crosswind that goes through the trap. I think it gives it a little bit more scent for the bees to find it. And I've got that on both sides, and then, you know, if I need to, I can just put a piece of plywood over the ventilation, and you know, and cover it up if it gets cold or something like that. So what I've done this year is I always have at least one piece of old comb, and then what I did last year with some really good success was use starter strips. And if you look, you'll see it's all propolized in. I used this last year, and what I do is I take a plastic foundation covered with wax, and I can cut about 6 or 8 different strips, and I actually glue them up into the groove of my frame. And what I think this does is it gives the inside a little bit more space, and so there's a little bit more room in there. And the only thing that you have to watch out for when you hang your trap is you have to make sure that your trap is level. If your trap is not level, bees use gravity. They festoon and they use gravity to build their comb. And so if your trap is leaning, they're going to build straight up and down. So you got to make sure your trap, if you use this method, you got to make sure your trap is level. If you use just regular foundation and an old comb or something like that in your bee boxes, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But if you're using this method with just the frames, with the starter strips, you really need to make sure that you're level. Also, one of the things that I like to do is I like to use a lemongrass oil. I've used Swarm Commander and lemongrass oil. I haven't been able to tell the difference. And what I do is I go into my wife's bathroom, and she's got a jar that she's got these makeup removers. And so what I do is I dabble some lemongrass oil on that, and then I will, if you notice, there are little cuts into the plastic bag, and then I will just put this into a bag and make some holes and put it in the bottom of the trap. What this does is it doesn't let the lure, the lemongrass oil, evaporate as quickly as if you just put it on a Q-tip and let it go. And the bees don't care. I mean, you'll catch a swarm and you'll transfer them into something else, and you'll just take this out, and they just sort of leave it in there. So that's what I like to use. I like to use, this has lemongrass oil in a plastic bag. I'll put that in the bottom of the trap, and then I'll put the lid back on. And something new I'm trying this year is I made my own swarm lure out of old comb and some lemongrass oil and some other secret ingredient products I'm going to try. I found a study by a university online of the different pheromones, different essential oils, things like that actually people are using. So what I've done is I've created a paste that is like a almost like a roll-on kind of deodorant kind of thing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually try this and smear some on the top of my lid and maybe some frames and see if it works. If it doesn't, hey, you live and learn. And one of the things that I like to do with my swarm traps is I like to put them along fence lines and fields and things like that. The bees will use the fence lines and the fields as reference points when they fly. And so this particular field is a clover field, so it's going to be loaded with bees anyway from all over the place. And so that's what I'll do, is I'll keep track, keep record, and find the spots that are pretty hot, and then I'll just keep throwing traps up when this season comes. I like to get my traps out before the swarming season starts, because it's you know, if you snooze, you lose when it comes to the swarm season. So that's what I do. That's what I like to do. It's worked for me, and there's a lot of ways of different swarm trapping, but this is something for me that has proved to work year after year. Always fine-tuning, always trying to get you know, some different techniques and try some different things. So anyway, that's what works for me. Hope this helps. Bye.